So you've acquired some great skills in a very short period of time. And what we're going to do in this video is we're going to do a code walkthrough. So code walkthrough is where you walk through somebody's code and you analyze it, you look at it, and it's usually something you do with people. And so it's like, hey, let's look through this code together. That's a code walkthrough. You should be aware of that phrase and just know that that's a phrase that people use. So we're going to do a code walkthrough and look at this page and see how it's built. And you pretty much have all of the skills necessary to build a page like this. And in the next video, I'm going to give you a challenge, which is to build this page right here. And so, you know, that's a really decent looking page. And you could start building web pages, websites for companies that, like a restaurant or something that needs a website. Like, you pretty much have the skills to do that. There's a few more things you need to learn, like publishing your web page or connecting different web pages together into a website or having a navigation with different links. But so far you've acquired some really great skills, and that just deserves being pointed out. So we're gonna do that code walkthrough on this page right here. And so this comes from, if we go to like MDN Learning the Web and we search through there, we get to this page right here. What is CSS really? And this is the last thing on that page right here. And if we look at that code, we could click right here, finished example code on GitHub. Here's their original code. Now already there's some things I do not like about this code, and this is from Mozilla, and this is an example of how to learn HTML. So I don't see any good reason, just doing our code walkthrough, to have HTML mentioned once right there, and then to also have it mentioned right here. Like, this should all be combined into one rule set. One rule set. That should all be, I was just looking for the correct phrase, all be combined into one rule set. There's no reason to separate those two. Likewise, we have image h1 body, p, and then we have h1. We have h1 here, and we have h1 here. So that's just going to create confusion for some other developer when they come in and they're like, why isn't this doing what I wanted to do? I've changed the h1. Well, because there's additional h1 settings down here, right? So that's like just the first thing. When I look at this page, I'm like, why did they do it that way? It doesn't seem very clean. I don't see any reason for them having done it that way. All right, so I've cleaned that code up, and we're going to walk through and take a look at it. And we're looking at these two files right here. So Mozilla 21. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the HTML file. So I've opened up both those files. I'm going to move my CSS out of the way. And here's my HTML file. And I have the doc type declaration that this is an HTML file. And I have my HTML opening tag, and we're using language English, and that encloses everything down here. This is all, you know, my HTML page. And then I have my head element, and I have my body element. And so in between the body, right, is everything that I want to have displayed here in this window. So this is where the body stuff shows up, is down in this window right down here. And then the head element is for everything else that you want to include in your page, other information about the page or things that are in the title. So remember, the title goes up here, just a little bit of review, all the stuff we've learned. So there's the title, Mozilla Rocks. And I'm saying, you know what, the encoding scheme is charset 8, UTF-8. And I'm asking for a Google font here. And I'm using single quotes in this one and double quotes in that, because we've learned you could use either. And this one includes text CSS, and mine does not. And I just did a little research on that because I want to make sure I'm informing you correctly. So I searched for, hey, is text CSS necessary in a link tag? And you know what I found is it's not required for HTML5, and this is Stack Overflow. And the HTML5 spec says the type attribute is purely advisory. Right, so you don't need that anymore. Though Google includes it, so maybe you want to too. Google certainly knows what they're doing. Or maybe it's just an oversight. You know, it's a small piece of text, who cares? And then down here we have the body tag, and we have H1. And so H1, you know, this is a semantic tag, and semantic meaning is it conveys meaning, right? H1, we have 6 headings, and H1 is the highest. And we don't use H1 to format, but we use H1 to say, hey, this is like one of the most important things on the page. this is the main heading of the page. Or if we had a couple of H1s, these are the main headings of the page. This is what this page is about. It has semantic value. So when search engines look at our website or our web page, they will be able to discern what is this web page about. Because one of the things they'll look at is what's in the H1 tags. And so that's what part of what we mean when we talk about semantic HTML. It has meaning. That H1 tag conveys meaning. It has a certain importance. Then we have an image tag, which is a self-closing tag, and this image tag has some attributes. It has the source attribute and the alt attribute. And there's a relative URL, so we learned all about that. And then our paragraphs and our bulleted list, so our unordered list right here. Then we have an anchor tag, and an anchor has a display property by default of inline, because when we look at this, right, this underlining is right in line with the rest of the text. It's not on its own line like it would be if it's a block level element. If the default display property is block level, it would be on its own line. But an anchor tag has the default display property of inline. Okay, all right, so now we go over to the CSS, and we have HTML and font size 10, font family, open sans and sans serif. So why those two, and what is sans serif? First, it's going to try to open sans if it can, and if it can't use that, it's going to look on the user's computer for a sans serif font. So a sans serif font, we should just mention this, right, is a font without feet. So if we look at this image right here, this font right here has serifs. So those little red things are serifs. The sans serif font does not have that, right? And this is the same font right here, but this is just highlighting the serifs. So sans serif, sans means without in French. And so this is without serifs, and this is with serifs. And Bob Marley wonders who shot the serif. Sorry. All right, bad joke. So that's the first thing there. We might turn this off and see how does it affect our web page, right? If we turn that off 10, I don't really see much of a difference. So I often will just get rid of things when I don't see a difference. Put it back, put it back, put it back. No difference. Bye-bye. Font family, background color. Okay, so that's our background color. That's this blue right here. We could see an icon representing that blue right there. And I could click that icon in WebStorm, which is pretty cool, and I could choose a different color. So you could see up here a selection of what color I'd get if I chose a different color, or a different shade of that color, or a different opacity. Pretty cool. And I'm not going to change it, so cancel. And then we have our body, and body width 600. So this part right here is the body, right? From there to there. So if we took that width off, it's going to fill in the whole page. So we need that. And then the margin 0 auto centers it in the page. So if we took margin 0 auto off, it's going to put it over to the left. So we need that. And then background color is orange. We like that background color. Padding is, 0, 20, 20, 20. So top, right, bottom, left. So top has 0 padding. Right, bottom, and left have padding. What happens if we turn padding off? You can see that collapsed right around the edges. Turn it back on. And we get that padding right here on the edges. And then we have the border, 5-pix solid black. So what happens if that's not there? That border went away. And that border really sort of sets it off. I think that border is really nice. So that's a good way to understand how CSS is working. Font size is 60. So that's for this one up here. And then text align is center. So a nice way to troubleshoot, I think maybe I've already showed you this, is border 3 pix solid black. And then I have a border around my whatever, that H1 element, right? And so text align center, what if I didn't have that on? It moved my text over to the left, so I like text align center to have that on. What if I didn't have padding? Huh, interesting. So padding, let's see this, with padding and then without. All right, so padding adds a little bit. And remember, padding is the space between the content and the border. So now that I've turned padding back on, you'll see more space between the content and the border. and that's top and bottom and 0 on the right and left. And then the color for the text is right there, and then shadow, and then we put the border on there. So that's kind of fun to play with. And you might compare this with like, you know, what if, and you might play with this here, what if we did our width of this to like 60%. So that's going to change the width of this H1 element up here just to play with it. And it did that, and we lost the border. Let me put the border back on. I like having that border. Width 60, let's do 70%. So there's the width 70%, and then could I add in margin 0 auto? So it's kind of cool just to see how these pieces work. So margin 0 auto took the entire element, right, and put it into the center, and without that, has it over on the left. And then without this, right, it's filling in the entire width. And the reason there's a little space right here and right here is because somewhere we have some padding. Right here on the body, we have padding of 0 on the top, 20, 20, 20. So right, bottom, and left. Right, left, 20 pixels right there. So if we took that out, right, that padding collapsed. So it's just kind of fun to play with that and see how are the different aspects on the page working. And that border, adding a border onto something, really helps sort of visualize what is this element doing on the page, this tag. How's it moving, right? So it's a really helpful thing. And then it's also really helpful just to play with the width, you know, like 70%, and see like how does that change what I'm trying to accomplish, you know? So that could give some insight, those two things. So then we have our image, and we have display block and margin 0 auto. What happens if I take, let me just make sure that's refreshed, take display block off on the image? So this is a little bit of like, you know, take some investigation, right? So one of the things I can investigate with is I'll leave display block on, and I'm going to turn on a border. And so there I have a border around an image. So they're changing the display property of the image. And when they change the display property of the image, margin 0 auto works. And they're changing it into block level display. So that makes me think that by default, an image is like inline. It must be an inline level display. So I did a little experiment here because I researched it. And what I found when I researched it, just to, you know, like what can I show you from the documentation, is that there's what it actually is that it's called a replacement element. So if we look here, regarding CSS, an image is a replacement element. It has no baseline, so when images are used in an inline formatting context with vertical line, blah, 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 right? But it's a replacement element. A replacement element is an element whose representation is outside the scope of CSS. Kind of interesting. So it behaves a little bit differently. And so I then looked on Stack Overflow, and they are both, images are both inline block elements, so they're both block and inline, right? So that's kind of interesting. But basically I was like, well, let me just go experiment and see what I come up with. So I put together this, and this is from this file right here, where we have an image. So an image has an something image. An image has, so this image is in a sentence, and you can see it being used in a sentence right here. So it's behaving like inline. It's right in line with the sentence. And then I put on the display property of inline to it. So I gave it display property inline. So that's just like, you know, inline display right here, inline style. It's an inline style right here. And I gave it the display property of inline, using inline twice. And that means that the image, right, is displayed inline. And then here's inline block, and it displays the same way. And then here's block. So it puts it on its own line. But that's just playing with the display property. So when we change it to block, it goes onto its own line. And then when it's on its own line, if we were to say margin 0 auto, it would move back and forth, right? It would go into the center. But otherwise, it's just in line. So it's just kind of a funny thing. So when I was doing this code review on this CSS, this part right here seemed a little bit like, that's interesting. Why is it working that way? So I just did that experiment to figure it out a little bit. So display block makes the image block. And if you're trying to get something to center with margin 0 auto, you might check it. What's the display property? Does it display in an inline fashion or in a block fashion? Because for margin 0 auto to work, you need it to be block. And then we have paragraph and LI, and that's pretty basic. Font size, line height, and letter spacing. These two, I'm not sure if we've covered this yet, but they're pretty self-explanatory. So that's a code review of this Mozilla page. Now, I know we went through that a little bit. You know, there's a lot of information in there. And I encourage you to take a look at this code. Like, download it, play with it yourself, and try different properties and try getting different things to work. And that's how you learn this material. So that's the Mozilla file. And in the next one, I will give you a challenge. And you already saw it. And then in the video after that, I'll show you the solution to the challenge.